Hark the baleful horns that blare at midnight, when needle folk crow their opiate cries, screaming in tongues by the quietest strands, to dance till dawn does them away with wrong. A crawling chimera made manifest these dreaded dreams of simic-ridden sheets and nightmares omens full of sorrowful flesh, clockhumming the mattress like dope fiends mad. This fading mansion moans with elwood rot, the alplanks hollowed, all the furnished decay, where lustrous mice creep and scuttle away. Mother Mouse's child, dead beneath the bed. Awake to leave this matter-wailing grief, tend to the lone drogol's pauper linen spinth, descend down the over-supulent shaft, all the silence with her noster howls, and speak no manner to Mr. Sear's ear, not of geists, lies, nor manifolds of mice, for the foul crone clutches her riches tight from these nights without vacancy and strife. Hotel Assailant by Ellis Wiens.
Hey, hello everybody. Today we got Ellis Wiens to talk about poetry, his trajectory as a writer. Ellis is a writer from Canada. He lives in Vancouver, at least that's what I get from his info on his Substack page. He's part of the Substack community for a while now, and I'm glad to have him on. He has a very interesting style, and I hope this talk can be of benefit to get to know his trajectory and a lot of the things that make his work really interesting. So Ellis, do you want to give a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Ellis, as you heard. Um, I guess there's not too much I can do to introduce myself, really. My introduction was dropping what I had on Substack, just my whole backlog back in June, I think it was. Um, yeah, prior to that, I'd only written a little bit. Recently, it's just been blowing up, so.
Okay, well, like part of what I think is interesting about making this series is getting to know the different kind of people that get into poetry, because it seems like kind of crazy thing to do nowadays. Like at least from the artistic perspective, not many. It doesn't have much standings to the point where it seems just like a kind of niche hobby, from being like one of the most high standing forms of art previously. So I'm always interested in seeing like the different backgrounds and perspectives of poets, how they got into it in this age where it seems so forgotten. So so what got you into poetry, or what started make you take it seriously?
Well, I think I started out where a lot of our people start out. So in school, they get you to do it. They get you to read certain poems that, maybe don't really click with you, but you have to analyze them anyhow. And then they get you writing some of your own. But yeah, getting into it for real, that was actually quite a recent thing. Um, Might be strange to believe, but Hotel of Silence, the one that you're going to read, actually, it actually ended up being one of my fairly early poems that I wrote in my adult life. So I'd say mostly what happened was I actually got into poetry writing more so before I got to poetry reading. The most poems that I've read probably have been on Substack, actually. Um, Mostly I really liked the idea of experimenting with language. Like I always thought it was quite interesting. So with that one, there was a bit of like impromptu etymology research that I used to kind of just like, if I couldn't find the right word, I would just make up my own, or I would combine different words to create a new meaning. and just kind of bend what the mind can think about with it.
Yeah, that's something I really like about your poetry, and something I might also kind of share in terms of like how I got into it. Like my first, I guess, poetic influence was actually like Burroughs, and I got into him after watching David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch. And when I read some snippets of his work, and I guess what really caught my eye from a poetic point of view was that kind of like um, experimentation with language that Boru has, right? Like he has that middle ground between like prose and poetry in a sense that where um, he really experiments in ways that like really opened up a lot of possibilities in my head of what you could do. So I also didn't really necessarily read that much poetry or was influenced at least to write poetry from any um, big poet, I guess. At that moment, it was more like a Boris what like kind of like opened my creativity in terms of what you could accomplish with these sort of like experimentations. Um, like in that sense, I think you would you say you're also like in the David Cronenberg Canadian sort of lineage because I think like there's a lot of stuff of similarities in your work, at
I was
least.
about to say you hit the nail on the head because I knew we were going to get to that at some point. So actually, to segue into that, so how I got into writing is strangely enough, growing up, I wasn't actually all that much into reading fiction. Like more so when I was a younger child, it was more so like encyclopedias and that kind of thing. Like different nonfiction books about like wildlife or things like that. I would say mostly I was into movies. And I think that David Cronenberg influence actually really tapped into me because I saw the Naked Lunch movie before I read the book. So I kind of had that visual aspect put to it, only to realize, oh, this is a very interesting adaptation that's just kind of, I guess, it's more so an adaptation of like William S. Burroughs' life combined with the book for certain aspects from the book.
Mhm. Yeah, and like well, I think um David Cronenberg is also interesting in that he's very literary, right? Like I think he got me into like a lot of readers, sorry, a lot of writers that I really enjoyed. Like at first it was like Burroughs, but like he's done, of course, J.G. Ballard. He's done, he made Cosmopolis by Don DeLillo. He made, let me see which else. Well, there's a lot of other minor works, but like, uh, he he works in that sense with very literary works of art, and I think like there's something to be said about how he manages to actually get that kind of stuff into the screen because like Naked Lunch would be like something you would consider almost like unfilmable in a sense, right? So like and I think like you also share that kind of constellation of writers in some way or influences. I don't know if you want to like for example, I also think I see a lot of like J.G. Ballard in your work.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is that well, I have read William S. Burroughs, but I have actually haven't gone around to J.G. Ballard yet. I've been putting off watching the David Cronenberg movie of Crash because I actually want to read the book first. Um, and then I just want to get even deeper into it from there. But yeah, quite a few other movies that I've seen by David Cronenberg. Like I've seen Crimes of the Future, I've seen Videodrome, Videodrome being one of my favorites. And yeah, I guess you can kind of see where the influence comes in. There's a bit of that, I guess, there's a bit of that film to book pipeline that happened with me because of course, there was the Cronenberg's adaptations that got me very interested. I have read Cosmopolis, but I haven't watched the movie yet. I'm going to get around to it very soon. But I would just actually say, oddly enough, one thing that got me really into reading was when I saw the most recent Dune movies, the Denis Villeneuve ones. So back when I saw part one of it, I decided, probably like a lot of people, okay, that's kind of cool. I'm going to go check out the book version of it because I want to get, kind of a richer explanation of things. And so I opened it, read the whole thing, and then from there, I kept reading more science fiction books. I read like Three Body Problem and that sort of thing. Eventually, I worked my way to, I just more like literary fiction. For example, like Blood Meridian was one that I think a lot of the people who went on Substack via Mr. Ian Conscious ended up finding, and I guess that kind of influenced them, and it influenced me too. Like I kind of saw like the poetry within the prose, if that makes sense, and I thought that's really cool. So I always wanted to emulate that. I always wanted to have it so that like reading the prose is a thing that is engaging in its own right. Like style is substance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree with what you just mentioned about Blood Meridian. I think like a lot of the problems people have with reading that book at first is because they kind of expect a novel, and I don't think it works like a novel. In some sense, it works more like epic poetry to me. And once I kind of made that switch, like I started actually enjoying the book a lot more. And but like continuing with like I guess this visual aspect in this translation into writing, I think like a lot of your pieces, um, like you have a very careful selection of the kind of art you put into them, and that's something I also really enjoy. Uh, it seems like the graphical element is something that is very present in your mind. So like we've already talked about film, but like it seems like painting in general also is a big influence.
Oh, 100%. Actually, to get a little bit deeper into that, so I would say, oddly enough, so before writing, I I kind of tapped into and engaged with different art forms in moderation. So one thing is I play bass guitar. So when I think it was around 2019, I went to school for it, and then COVID happened. So basically, I was kind of in the process of learning another art form, but in some ways, because you don't really have other people to play with, uh, you can only get so far with it. And though I have built up that skill, I never really ended up becoming a musician, as one example. Um, and then in terms of painting, I had engaged with it before, but just couldn't really keep up with it. The material cost is quite a bit, and also with digital paintings, there were just certain things I want to do that I couldn't really emulate on a computer as much. So, for example, in the digital, like uh, it's harder to really show texture, if that makes sense. Because like in the visual arts, when you look at a piece, like you can really see the texture with it. I especially really like that kind of a very like rich oil painting kind of look. Um, and another thing too is also watching tons of movies, um, and reading books, of course. And the other part is uh, I'm not sure to what degree this influenced me, but I actually think it was quite a bit. So my friend group, we play Dungeons and Dragons. We basically do like tabletop role playing games. We've kind of made our own, and we make uh, like our own unique systems. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like I guess that kind of like theater of the mind conductor type art style and that ability to spin a story right on the spot, it kind of translated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm actually like a big proponent of like acting and role-playing games as ways to really connect the more um, with the abilities of the imagination, because like writers, and I think especially today, have a tendency to over intellectualize their work and think like, for example, that think more about it than they write. And I don't think, for example, that especially like fiction is like an intellectual labor. It does have certain elements, but it has to be more of a of like imagination based activity, right? Like and getting into that state, it kind of be like intellectualizing things can actually be opposed to entering into that state. So any type of exercise that forces you to stop analyzing and thinking, and instead of just go into a more creative state, like in role-playing games, I think is of tremendous help to writers of fiction.
Oh, I'd 100% agree with that. Because the thing is that like obviously there's the basic element of like your plot has to be logical, or at least it abides by its own logic, and everything kind of falls into place that way. But I think it kind of helped in the sense that, how would I put this? You're used to being able to tell a story and not obsess over it too much, because in role playing games it's like you kind of only get one draft, if that makes sense, and it is a collaborative effort, so you're willing to kind of relent. There are a lot of things that are out of your hands, um, and because of that it actually kind of I guess it gave me maybe more so a raw creative spirit when it came to my writings, because it's more like obviously the editings can get rigorous sometimes, but for the most part, it's like you start with kind of a kernel of an idea, and then when you keep working on it, eventually you have a full thing that's been made. And it's just ideas bouncing one off the other. So everything just kind of falls into place. It kind of gives you that storytelling faith, if that makes sense. You just have faith that's going to work out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this is like a thing that is hard to balance. I think especially I think it's one should be able to separate cleanly the states of creation and editing, right? Like they both require separate sets of abilities, and if you try to edit while you're writing, that's only gonna uh, throw a wrench into the process, right? Like this is manifests kind of like the, I guess, judgmental um, tendency of writers, right? Like, oh, well, this is not good enough, or this is not at the level of detail that I wanted right now. And instead of of making it better, most people then just don't do it, right? Like it just kind of like they get frustrated, and they leave it. So I think it's very important to have that kind of separation where you're able to go as innocently and kind of like childishly into the first creative um, outburst, and from there kind of be capable of start introducing that more analytical editing capacity, because otherwise, like, and that's something like I struggle with a lot, and I think it's especially hard for writers, right? Like because uh like writing is interesting in the terms that like we don't really have that big of a range between like really I guess initial or like immature forms of art. Like in music, it's more, we're more willing to go to our friends like garage band and hear them play, even though it might be kind of bad or stuff like that. But like in writing, we always have like really high standards. So that can be very punishing when you're just beginning because you're always setting yourself against the best instead of having like a more like forgiving like kind of like ladder to grow upon.
Yeah, I would agree with that because, yeah, I would say for the most part, it's like if you're reading books that have been published, they've already gone through rigorous revisions, right? And they've already gone through an editor and they've probably had beta readers to some degree. So yeah, for the most part, it's definitely an art that allows more, I guess, more room to really double down and just over obsess a little bit because there's just so much opportunity to change things. Because, like, for example, with music, you can obviously you can change things around. We have a lot of music technology that can do that. But for the most part, it's like if you're able to play the piece and it sounds cool, for the most part, they're going to leave it and just keep it the way it is. And there is a kind of go with the flow mentality with that uh, between music and role playing games, actually. So I kind of try to embody that a little bit with my writings, where I would actually say for the most part, my first drafts end up pretty clean for the most part. Um, and then from there, it's just I've noticed that a lot of ideas are starting to click. A lot of it ends up being me cutting out what doesn't quite work. Um, and then after that, it's me double checking if the words mean what I believe they mean and making sure that I choose exactly the right words to use. Because as you've probably noticed, I'm obsessed with like alliteration and assonance and that kind of thing. So I like to kind of embody that, I guess, that musical element in what I'm writing.
Yeah, and maybe I want to touch back upon something you mentioned before in this connection between like the visual and the the literary aspect is that I think like your work text like in your poetry texture is very important in that sense. Um, and like part of it is of course like the attention you give towards um words like in a very specific way like of course you have a lot of neologisms in your work, but it's also something that is seems very well researched or understood in terms of their um, musical quality in a sense, and but also like yeah, like kind of like the tone, like um like the separation between like the etymological aspects of it, like between like mixing I don't know like Old English or Germanic roots or Greek roots and the Latinate roots, and all to influence that kind of like mood and tone in your story. So do you want to comment on your interest in this sort of play?
Yeah, I would say, strangely enough, so one of the first short stories that I wrote in when I was an adult, it was Croc. I believe it was the first one I posted on Substack because I just kind of kept them all roughly in order, like chronologically when I made them. Um, and oddly enough, it kind of happened by accident almost. I decided that I would just make sure that the prose was quite sharp, and then I think that a lot of subconscious things kind of converged where there were just certain points where there was a word that had, I guess, a certain depth to it, and I just happened to use it because it really just aligned with the sound of the rest of it, and then I really tried to double down on those magical moments that happened along the way, and then just kind of tried to separate that from the stuff that was maybe didn't quite work out so much, where you just kind of have an incomplete thought, and you're like, oh, I need to get these words out and just do it. So I would say that for the most part, that's really the thing that separates things in the editing process.
Okay, and it's like I guess the etymological uh, aspect in the history of words, something that you have really gone into studying and influences your work?
In terms of influences, um, yeah, I would say the etymological tapped into quite a bit. I'm actually not in that field, so a lot of it ends up being like, let's say, for example, if I've read something that, it uses a certain word or it twists it in a new way, or I just see related terms. Like, for example, in some languages, a word might be like they might be connected etymologically, and you can see if there's a slight difference between the two in terms of definition. So I would say that that part kind of just, it was always just kind of part of me. I just sort of tapped into it and just tried to expand on it a little bit.
Okay. Like and like there's like an interesting aspect in the sense of this I guess play between um the neologism and the etymological history, like between like past and future, which I think is like a blend that you explore in some different ways, like right, like there's um thematically like the futuristical aspects seem to be very prevalent in your work, like machines and the connection between like machines and the humans and the biological and technology. And is this something like a theme that you are I would say like explicitly interested in?
Yeah, so as far as themes go, 100% there are themes that I'm interested in because even when I first made my Substack, like I barely changed the description for my bio, but as you can see, stories and poems on the liminal, mutation, altered states, urban decay, the encroaching natural order, etc., etc. And I don't know what it was, but I always had the feeling that there were just a certain group of motifs and just certain thematic qualities that I would always want to focus on. Because basically, I mean, I've always been a fan of like science fiction and dystopia and that kind of thing. So I really want to kind of double down and give it a bit of that literary edge because I always thought to myself, okay, like to talk about, you know, to talk about like the changing of the human body, to talk about like ways in which it can be altered, whether that be like drugs or illness or just different things that kind of change the human experience. I always just thought there was just so much untapped potential in that. So I always thought, okay, if I'm gonna double down on some themes, I'll choose some mighty ones. I'll choose some ones that are about, you know, trying to retain your form, but things are always changing, and there's always that kind of unexpected horizon, and just the ways in which our experiences can shift so suddenly.
Okay, and that would lead me, I guess, to like a follow-up question about kind of like your worldview and how art in general ties into it, or at least like your artistic pursuits. Do you have like any sort of fixed worldview or spirit or religion or spiritual I guess preference?
I would say that I'm agnostic in pretty much all regards. In fact, I actually kind of went down a bit of I guess, a bit of a rabbit hole. Mostly like 5 years ago or so, I would almost try and intellectualize things a little bit too much. Like, for example, I kind of went down this downward spiral, almost applying logic too much, um, in which I would almost kind of view things with a certain solipsism. I would view fact itself as something that is very fluid and something that is like poorly represented in a lot of regards. So I would say that maybe one of the things that really pushed me towards the arts actually is that in my attempt of understanding the world, because I'm always trying to work at it, I would say that it kind of gave me an outlet to, I guess, like pay heed to more personal truths. Because there's a certain strength in the subjective, right? Like always, there is the update of certain factual knowledge that needs to be addressed, and it's always best to just kind of go with the flow with that, and mostly just try and integrate in a way that is going to be meaningful to the self, if that makes sense. Because I would say that you can't really get by if you are just caught in that overthinking loop. There kind of has to be a point where you cut it off and you just say, I'm going to make it this way because this is what the body's telling it. This is how it needs to be. And you just kind of let it go.
Mhm. I find it interesting, like the aspect you mentioned right now about the body in terms of kind of like maybe a biological drive against reason or this kind of like positivist outlook. Um, and maybe in that sense, it kind of might represent that same dichotomy that we were talking about between like kind of like the more machine aspects of man and the biological. So, like in your experience, how do you perceive the drive of the body into art?
Well, I've always thought about it this way. You know, we're all kind of cyborg-like to some degree when you think about it, because for every crafts person, they kind of learn how to interface with reality using the tool itself. So because of that, it's like when I'm sitting down and I'm writing, like it's all very cyborg-like. Like I use a word processor because it's just the way that I think works best. So you're sitting down, typing away, and it's strange because you always think to yourself, like, okay, in the absence of this thing that was created by other people, in the absence of this product, you just kind of lose that ability to um, you lose that ability to access that way of thinking or doing things. Like always, the environments and what we surround ourselves with, it's always just kind of tweaking what you're able to do. And it's the reason why I think constantly about like, okay, a lot of people are kind of tied to what they are, but to some degree, the systems that they have around them kind of influence what they are able to do. And when you influence what they're able to do, you influence their habits. When you influence their habits, you influence their way of thought, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree. Personally, maybe go and expand it or at least talk about it from the part of the body and how like also these um changes in the body can affect like your artistic and mental output in a way, like the seasons, the things you eat, your your health, ways of illness, um, which is one of the things I find really interesting, like maybe pushing like the interface a little bit further back, right, in terms of not only like the keyboard or the pen as these sort of interfaces, but like our body itself has this strange place in it, like where certain alterations can define your artistic output. For example, T.S. Eliot mentioned that he was only able to write when he was feeling sick or feeling ill, right? So there's almost like this very interesting connection between altered states of physiology, um, not only sometimes influencing, but almost demanding some form of artistic expression. And probably Cronenberg has also delved into the sort of um, thing. So like was in that sense, have you had like any experiences of the sort, like or with whether it's illness or other forms of alteration in biology?
Um, yeah, it's really interesting because like looking at so many writers throughout history, like so many of them had their different ways of doing it. Um, like for example, there's of course the classic. There's Ernest Hemingway, who he would always stay up late and do his drinking, and I guess in that kind of haze of liquor, uh, he was able to tap into something that was very unfiltered, and that's just how he pushed himself. He would always keep going, and he would kind of leave things unfinished almost, but he would just keep on going because that filtering part of his mind had been eroded. And I know that there are many other authors who, as opposed to alcohol, they would turn to like different kinds of uppers. They would always try and just like stimulate themselves to just try and get as many ideas out as possible. So to that degree, like there's the technological aspect, like how's it going to alter your process from typing on a typewriter versus typing on a computer and so on. But then there's also the biological aspects, the more raw physiological, which is like, have you had enough sleep, or have you had breakfast, or how many cups of caffeine have you had? Are you riding that sugar rush to try and get through it? So I always found that part pretty interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's also something like I um thought about a lot, and also from personal experience and like in other authors, like it's certainly like the relationship towards drugs is interesting, like the difference between I guess different temperaments and how some benefit from some things like caffeine, for example. Like Balzac would like famously drink like 30 cups a day of coffee and like get into like a manic state where it's almost like um yeah, levels of caffeine where it almost becomes psychedelic. Or no, alcohol is of course kind of like the cliche notion of it, like, but like it's interesting to consider like the differences between like depressants and stimulants and psychedelics and like the and what benefits. Some authors like Philip K. Dick, you're probably also like a fan from a lot of the things you mentioned. Like he had like a very complicated relationship also with it. Like with he was given um well, as a kid he had, I guess, well, the what we would consider now HDHD, and got medicated for it with um the equivalent, I guess, of Adderall. So he struggled all his life with kind of like methamphetamines and stuff like that. And and it's just like yeah, it's like it's not necessarily to make the argument that drugs are necessary, like in a hippie kind of way. It's just that achieving those sort of altered states is I guess many authors have gone different ways about it, and there's definitely more healthy ways. As we mentioned, like role playing is probably one of the healthiest, acting, theater, right? Like it's ways to getting into to tap into the imagination without necessarily having to um, alter with artificial substances your body. But but yeah, like all these sort of things that are very interesting to consider is not necessarily um, that easy to fix or to pinpoint what will sometimes help. Like I've had like sometimes when like periods of insomnia where like that drives me into like big creative outbursts, right? Like, but which is obviously not sustainable, right? So it's just kind of learning to understand in that sense also the body in its kind of more tool aspects, more from the side of kind of like the weird mechanical aspects that it has into achieving these sort of states.
Yeah, to expand on that, yeah, I always thought that it was pretty interesting just how much it can be altered because like outside of, you know, the obvious of like, oh, there's the author who's been drinking too much or has been taking uppers. There's the other aspect where it's all about, I guess, just some of them ended up being very routine oriented because that's kind of another way in which you can prompt the mind to just kind of keep working and to kind of force creativity, if that makes sense. Like once you make it a ritualistic thing, it becomes almost like it almost becomes like the slightly harder version of brushing your teeth, for example. Like you still have to use conscious thought to do it, but it's like when all of like the stimuli are happening around you that are leading up to that moment, it prompts the body, it prompts the mind, and you're like, okay, it's time to do this thing. So that can definitely be the more healthy aspect that drives it. And I like that you bring up the tabletop role playing games too, because it's like to some degree, you know, when we're carrying ourselves in regular life, you already kind of, whether consciously or unconsciously, uh, embody different roles and have kind of a different persona around different people. So to actually act out as the character and kind of direct them via like rolling dice, for example, it kind of keeps you on your feet and it makes you think like, okay, so in this moment, what would this character do? Why would they succeed this? Why would they fail this? And where would they take it from here? So it really forces you to think as the character because I would say the self is quite multifaceted. Like there are a lot of different types of people you can become depending on again your environment and versus what's in your body. Um, and I would say that that can kind of direct uh, a new kind of creative outlet where it's all about like how are you going to present the self to others. So maybe to some degree that was part of the thing that actually pushed me towards writing as well is I always did have a little bit of that need for trying to perfect things, but I couldn't quite get that in tabletop role playing games. And also too, like if you're in the absence of your friends who you play with, obviously you need to you need to kind of find something else to do because you don't have that collaborative element anymore. You don't have everyone uh, grouping together to make that thing happen. So from there, it pushes you deeper into the mind, if that makes sense, to try and draw out what was there and to see how you're going to form stories when you're in the absence of others and it's just you and whatever text you're playing on the page.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that also makes kind of writing in all its facets kind of interesting is that it seems a lot less clear what are the abilities that you have to develop, right, in terms of technique to get something. Um, Most other art forms have a very clear, I guess, curriculum of things you need to kind of learn if you want to kind of develop, right? Like in painting, like or sculpture or music, there's a lot of basics and things that you have to get a grasp on in order to be able to express yourself. But writing has this peculiarity that it deals, I guess, with language, which is something everybody uses. So it gives kind of like this false impression that you're already in control of the tools that you have, like, to various degrees, like, even if you go deeper into studying like grammar and syntax, like most people feel like they could write story or a novel or whatever. It gives this um false sense of confidence that you already have the tools in order to do it. And part of it is like it has to do, I think, with this aspect of the more subtle aspects of what you're working with. Like in writer especially, yes, it is um less important, I guess the mechanical aspects of writing, like that's not too important, like in comparison to, for example, like a painter who has to really develop um their craft through like um you know figures and traces and their brushstroke and stuff like that. And we writers, I think there's like, because it's more subtle, as we mentioned, like for example, in terms of imagination, sensibility, it's more kind of like a um ethereal concepts, which we don't really, as a culture, we don't really talk about much. We don't really um we kind of almost forget about them, in a sense, like things like the creative aspects and imagination, and 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 we almost conceive them as a sort of whimsical thing that occurs without control, and that it just you get like a source of inspiration, and you kind of have to rely on the chaotic element of it. And while there's obviously like an element of that, there's also like something that can actually be developed and practiced and exercised. And like we of course mentioned things like role playing and acting and theater, but also like different um, things that, like for example, routine, as you mentioned, to kind of like um, force yourself into it, which might be like a little bit more of a brute force approach. But I would say like a lot of other spiritual practices can also help. Like for example, meditation in in David Lynch's case, and a lot of other people. And I think that aspect is what especially relevant in writing, to understand that you have to deal with how to exercise and develop imagination, so that the tendency of the kind of inherent tendency of intellectualizing things in writers does not take over.
Yeah, I know what you mean by that because the thing is that like obviously uh, there are many different languages, but everyone knows how to use language to some degree. So it always gives that option of, I guess, writing being in some ways the most accessible type of art. Because if you were to have someone sit down and they've never played guitar before, for example, and you give them a guitar, they wouldn't necessarily know exactly what to do with it, right? Like it's not really a skill that they had been practicing up until that point. But being able to talk with people or being able to even just type an email, like all of those things just kind of add up, and it gives you the most rudimentary elements of being able to write. So it being the most accessible art, you will also find like the biggest, uh, I guess the biggest amount of like works that kind of don't really resonate with most people, or works that are just kind of like they don't necessarily um, they don't necessarily do much clever. It's just someone writing to write, which is totally fine. But I think it's really neat to see that because recently I actually read a book that was called Bloodstained Bamboo Curtain by Roxy Paulson. I just found it in one of those sidewalk libraries, and it feels like I'm reading like a first or second draft that someone wrote. And I can respect that. Some person just sits down and decides to write out an entire book, and they self-publish it. And there's something kind of oddly admirable about that. It's almost like to some degree, uh, there are quite a few amateur authors who are like they're very into like trying to push their book, like trying to get out there. And that's a pretty bold act. So I always thought that Lang was kind of unique in that way, where it doesn't necessarily require some sort of rigorous education. It's something that pretty much anybody can do. But to comment on what you said before about like Lang having that kind of ethereal aspect, maybe that's partially what drew me in as well. Because like you probably heard this before, there are people who read books, and when they watch like a film adaptation of that book, for example, they get very up in arms about it and think that it doesn't quite translate. And the reason why it doesn't quite translate is because obviously, first of all, it depends on the story and the way the movie was handled. But the other aspect of it too is that theater of the mind quality. Like things always happen to be uh, like more rich and more detailed when you are invited to imagine, if that makes sense. Like by comparison, as much as I love film, it's a slightly more passive uh, digesting experience. Like you just kind of sit back and you take it all in. And I would say to some degree, music is the same way too. Like there is active watching, active listening, but it doesn't force you to go down that imaginatory route as much to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, yeah, that's also a very important point, and I think very relevant considering our media environment now is dominated by images, and you can see the effect that it's having in language itself, and the sort of degeneration of language when you're capable of expressing things more quickly through images and memes and emojis and all these kind of things. Like we're like a lot of um, like previously, a lot of people would develop a lot more their writing skills because communication was limited to writing letters, and in that kind of long form way of communication forced people to develop language in a way that most people don't do nowadays. Like it becomes like more of the chat culture, and even social media. There's this tendency towards kind of like brevity, and so all of these things I think have had like a very complex effect on the way we communicate, and sadly like that's made um, things like poetry almost unintelligible for most people, right? Like the linguistic capacity of most people nowadays is so basic that they haven't even exercised any sort of sophistication in the use of language, and cannot even understand most of it. So in that sense, they're like part of like the work of poets is not even to not it's not that we're not, I guess, making good poetry. Is mostly that most people do not have even the tools or the capacity to understand it. So there's almost like a need to um like a to well ed, like an education aspect of it that has to be like presented to people, right? Like how to actually engage with poetry, because I disagree with a lot of people that in the sense that poetry is easy or should be easy and accessible to all. Like it's not that it shouldn't be either, but like it does require an effort, as you mentioned. Like that is more well the image, like the effort of the imagination to kind of like understand and build the things that are being presented to you that most people do not engage, because you have that this immediate media that has almost stifled or almost completely atrophied people's capacity for um, to engage with this kind of work.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that you bring that up because, yeah, I do feel like that aspect of literacy has it's kind of died down a little bit. Um, because with poetry, it's maybe the one that requires like the most trust almost. It requires the most buy-in because you kind of have to allow yourself to sit back and be willing um, to read it and reread it and kind of decipher technique almost to get closer to the truth that was trying to be communicated in it. Um, so I would say that to that degree, like when I practice poetry, I'm mostly sharing it with other writers, of course, and people who are rigorous readers. I don't necessarily think it's the aspect of writing that's going to reach out to the most people. Um, but I still think it's important to practice because it really gets you thinking about syntax and it really gets you thinking about like the more meta aspects of language. Because I'm more so the proponent of poetry can be just about anything as long as it involves language, right? Like you can tweak things and you can create neologisms as you brought up. You can get crafty and make up your own compound words and still communicate something, right? Even if it doesn't necessarily land with the person who's reading it, it's not necessarily the fault of the poet or the reader who's reading it. Um, I would say that to add on that, one thing that hurts me recently is the reason why I get pretty precise with the words that I either invent or select. It's because I actually think nowadays it's in some ways it makes more sense to make books that have very complicated language or use certain niche terms because for the most part, like when people are reading something, what are they going to have close to them? They're going to have their phone close to them or their computer close to them. And on there, you can basically search up any word you want. So, and if there's a section that's in a language, for example, that the reader doesn't understand, they can pull up Google Translate and they can translate it. So there's always that kind of aspect where, going back to interfacing with technology, that actually makes it more accessible to some degree, but also made it so that I don't hold back as much. I'm more willing to kind of select exactly what needs to be said instead of trying to keep it a little too basic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like the weird paradox of having the capacity to really engage with way more new words very accessibly, but at the same time, um, it hasn't really gone that way in the way in terms of like internet culture. Um, Instead of having accessing, I guess, a more vast portion of the history of the language, most people, curiously enough, start, uh, tending more towards slang and like in the yeah, kind of like the meme uh, meme words, basically, right? Like and this is something that I
Yeah,
thought is really interesting in terms of social media and how that starts to affect a writer's capacity. And I think like Twitter or X is especially noxious in this way. Like even though it's there's like highly sophisticated discussions in X, they have to be forced down into kind of meme language. So you'll have like PhDs or maybe like in their like grown-ups and they still have to force themselves into the style of kind of like teenagers into meme words and and into all this kind of like meme phrases. So I find it really interesting. Like of course, like there's kind of like this big collapse of kind of like academia and academic language, and it's kind of funny that trying to escape from that sort of restraint, they fall into like another one, which is kind of like the Twitter or social media kind of vortex, where then it starts forcing it into like a different kind of like codified language with like the all the current meme phrases and words, even though it might be to talk about Deleuze and Guattari or whatever, like kind of like highbrow concepts.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because um, the thing is that being able to have that ability to take jargon and to make it accessible in such a way that it's like, oh, you're kind of stooping to like the meme language, I guess. I find that interesting because I think that there's a pro to it and there's a con to it. So the pro to it is that like you're able to get certain people who are not part of that intellectual field to get at least a basic understanding of something. And because of the learning process, like I would say basic understanding is more like it's better than nothing. It's good to kind of have that element there. But I would say that the con to it, I would say it's maybe pretty plain to most of us. It's that there's inevitably a certain kind of depth that you're going to lose out on. Um, yeah, I think that it's interesting because part of the meme culture is that it requires a certain cultural context to understand a lot of them because culture changes so fast on the internet when it's like every single cultural aspect is kind of centralized and just kind of unfolding naturally. Um, but you can kind of see like the social consensus always mutating. You always kind of see that like there are certain things that were relevant from 3 years ago that are suddenly nowhere to be seen just because of the way like information is congregated and people eventually just have to move on. Like I've always thought to myself, like in the future, internet historians, they're going to have so much to decipher. It's insane. Like, how are they even going to figure out the meaning of some of these? Like, because there's so much language and so many different aspects of social culture being clashed together. It's like you kind of understand it in the moment, or it requires a rigorous amount of research to kind of figure out what that thing meant. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, there's even like a sort of like cryptic or hermetic quality of it. Like when I first started using like Twitter when it was in the pandemic, and like and it took me like a while to just kind of figure out the, I guess, all the niche references and the special language to kind of understand like the discourse that was going on at the time, and um and it definitely has that sort of like um maybe purposely or not, like that like entry level filtering out of kind of like code language in a way, which which might even like get more ramped up as AI kind of like tries to compete in some ways, like it makes sense to kind of like be ever more cryptic to kind of escape those nets. Although, like it's like one of the things that is interesting, like there's a lot of uh um well, at least in terms of like the change of the literary culture, like I think a lot of it has to do that a lot of writers just rather or are compelled to put all their activity into just like kind of like X, and really struggle. People who might have a lot of talent might post really interesting content, then struggle to make any a kind of work that can transcend that like milieu. And I guess this is where the more media um, studies would kind of like be relevant, kind of like the McLuhan approach, right? Like it's I don't think that there's like an interesting problem where it's not that interesting stuff's not being posted, it's just being posted in a medium that kind of twists and well um, limits a lot of the well, on the one side, like the creative um, forms, but also like the way you engage with it. And this is, of course, like a problem in Substack also. Like, even though it's probably like the most healthy of the social platforms, it still has all this social media technology that does not reward focus and like deep concentration, right? Which is something that I think, as we mentioned, literature requires, right? Because it has that cold medium requirement of actually putting effort into it and engaging with imagination. So it's I think like the main one of the main problems writers have to face now, how to, both from the point of view of their output, but also from the point of view of like their audience, how to deal with the problem of how has our way of engaging with language has changed.
Yeah, I've always thought about that too, because just using Substack as the example, um, because one thing is, you're right, it doesn't really reward that deep focus per se. There is the note system, which I actually I got a kick out of using it. And, I always kind of believed in like that, uh, that golden mean between like the amount of focus that you spend versus like how decadent you get with just like intaking whatever. Because for example, like on notes, I kind of like to scroll through and like look at some funny stuff and see if there are any other authors that I can reach out to via that. But then there's the other aspect of it where it's like, okay, so when's the scrolling going to stop? When are you actually going to click on that story that you have in your saved posts, right? Like the actual website infrastructure itself, it makes certain things kind of difficult. For one thing, the formatting on it is not very book-like, so I guess that part doesn't really matter too much for the poetry. But for the rest of it, it really feels like you're reading a post, not an art piece, right? Not like a thing that's been rigorously formatted. So I think to that degree, it can kind of take you out of it. And there's the other aspect too, where it's like, actually going back to the whole interfacing technology thing, it's like when you always have the other tabs available. The thing is that that can also kind of prompt you to be like, if you get slightly bored of it, uh, there's always that prompt to be like, okay, I can switch to something else and come back to this. And to that degree, it's like because you have everything at your fingertips, it can kind of distract you from what's actually being said, if that makes sense. So I would say to that degree, like writing in an age that is very hyper digital, it presents certain advantages. For example, like increasing the accessibility of just being able to have certain things translated or certain definitions given to you without having to rigorously research it or to pull out your dictionary and labor over it. Versus the aspect of, oh, if you're a person who has fractured attention, you're not going to get too much out of it because there's always going to be that that potential for distraction that's around you.
Yeah, um it's kind of like the curse, and also I guess like the great potential of kind of like the misfit arts right now, like poetry, theater and like to a great deal now all literature in a sense, that um, like the dullness in contrast, yeah, it prevents, I guess, from it getting like the traction and the success that other art forms have, but also it has the potential to actually do something for people who do choose to engage with it. And probably as things are increasing to well, what is already like a mental health crisis. Um, I think a lot of people will be um, deciding and choosing to engage with those forms rather than continue on the frictionless spiral of just like slop media. and that's kind of like I think that's one of like the well, the missions, at least in the cultural aspect, that is kind of noble about these forms of art, to kind of like create the art forms that can lead to some form of healing of that distraction epidemic that we have.
Yeah, it makes sense that you bring that up because yeah, the mental health aspect is definitely one of those things that I focus on, like, thematically in terms of the works that I make, but also it's something that kind of permeates the way that people interact with it too. Um, because something that I write about a lot is like, um, you know, the ways in which like the body can be kind of defeated, how the will can be bent or broken. Um, and it can happen through all sorts of different means. Because, for example, there's the more obvious one, which is the drug aspect. Um, like here in Vancouver, there's a huge drug problem. Um, there's basically a kind of opioid crisis that has happened, and a lot of people who don't really have access to affordable housing, eventually they just kind of turn to trying to manage their hopeless circumstances. So they turn to a drug that just completely blots out their conscious existence. Like there are people who are just completely zoned out. And to some degree, even if people don't necessarily go to such drastic measures as injecting themselves with opioids or smoking opioids, um, there's always that other aspect to it where you have your phone on you at all times, and there are ways in which your body produces dopamine based on how you interface with that. And so I think, especially during COVID-19, like there were a lot of people who were very shut away, and that kind of became the way they socialized with people. And I would say that through that, almost created, I guess, a society that's so I guess it's so adjusted to interacting with, like feedback loops of like echo chambers and ways of belonging that are maybe kind of superficial, and ways of engaging with content that are maybe also kind of superficial. Because it, like if the reward comes so easily, why do the buy-in? Why put so much effort into it? Like everything is just kind of connected to this spectrum of addiction. Like obviously uh, there's the more severe aspects, which is like you've been smoking fentanyl, so you need to go get another hit like straight away. Or if you've been drinking a lot of alcohol, it's like you need to get more of it, or else the withdrawal could kill you. And then there's the more mild aspect that I think permeates everything, where it's like everyone needs to have their device on them because to some degree is how they derive pleasure, is how they uh, interact with even just their work or their social life. For example, always being able to reach out to their friends, and in the work aspect, like always having to have like a certain app in order to like clock in or clock out, or um, or being able to access information or keep in contact with peers. So to some degree, it's like as technology improves medically or digitally, uh, there's like even more avenues for people to have their willpower fractured, if that makes sense. And it's not about saying that the technology itself is evil or that it's innately wrong. It's more so that we've kind of reached like a bit of a tipping point where we're starting to see some things that were maybe more so like not addressed as a problem straight away, kind of spiraling into chaos almost because they just did it in the background. And now we're starting to see the long term effects of like what happens when there's so many different avenues of addiction. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think like the problem is that all of our economy and design of any kind of service or product is geared and based on um, addictive behavior. That's kind of like the economic strategy of almost everything that gets made nowadays. And
Oh yeah, 100%. That is the economic strategy. Yeah.
so that's like that's kind of like the it leaves a lot of aspects of life very vulnerable when you have to defend yourself on all fronts from all the ways people are trying to get you addicted to something, and some of them are almost inevitable in a way, right? Like social media, like not that any of it is absolutely necessary. Like you can choose to drop out in many kind of ways, but it's more like I think there has to be like a big push in terms um, of the conscience of how we are interacting with these things in order to not fall prey to them. And and I think part of at least the social uh, benefits or objectives I have with art is kind of to make things that um, do not fall in that spectrum of kind of like endless entertainment, but kind of like try to in some ways show the value of engaging with what appears dull and hard and that requires effort, right? Like because it's something that will be a necessity for a healthy person and society in the coming years, right? Like to have a reconsideration of how we deal with pleasure and entertainment and all forms of biases that we have nowadays.
Yeah, 100% agree with that because yeah, one thing is that I guess things are always connected to a very like transactional nature, if that makes sense. Um, because like even if you don't need to, as you said, you can drop out of a lot of these, but a lot of it is that you actually end up compromising because you don't really have too many other paths to take. Like for example, if your career requires you to have your phone on you at all times, there is kind of always that expectation, and then at that point you can't really escape it. It's kind of just you with your raw impulse control at that point. Um, and I think to different degrees, like people have ways of kind of distracting themselves from that, or ways of resisting, or like a more a more like balanced, kind of healthy lifestyle where they don't necessarily turn to it immediately. But yeah, for sure. In a lot of different ways, uh, it kind of bends society as a whole almost. Like really seeing the long term effects of all of it.
Yeah, and it's even not, it hasn't, they're almost not even so much so long term in that sense, like the way the world has changed in, like from when like social media started to become popular up till now, I think it's like a relatively short amount of time, and like the changes have been like immense and like almost catastrophic in that sense, especially after COVID, like everything just seemed to even ramp up. And but like interestingly, like now that I guess that sort of cultural bubble exploded, like in the previous years, I think there's like a lot of exhaustion regarding social media, and I think like a lot of people are starting to um um use it like less in some ways. Like I would say that like at least in contrast to, or like the way like Facebook was popular, or even Twitter, like I think a lot of people are um kind of dropping out slowly, and or at least trying to find ways. And personally, I think that it's a good moment to start um, finding those new avenues to interact with each other, and put the effort needed to kind of like transcend and push back against the inertia that like social media has like instilled in all of us. So so yeah, I guess like part of it is having kind of the things like these talks, like in other mediums that I think reward attention a lot more in deeper forms of communication that are just not um, well provided for in, well, even Substack or YouTube or other forms of content, I guess. And yeah, maybe like to start kind of um, closing the conversation. I don't know if there's anything you want to bring up, or any subject you wanna discuss.
Subjects I want to discuss. Ooh, here's kind of an interesting one. So, as you know, most recent fiction piece that I dropped, the Sisyphus mechanism. So, one thing that I've always thought about that actually influenced me quite a bit is I've always kind of had this I don't know how to explain it, this idea, this concept that keeps haunting me, but basically kind of this idea of like the ontology of organisms, and like before you mentioned something about metataking, as you know, David Lynch did a lot of that in order to kind of access new ideas and to go a little bit deeper down that avenue, because it kind of disconnects you from your disconnects you from what you're used to sensing. And in that absence, it kind of gives you more of an opportunity to practice that flexible thinking, that bit of that imagination, kind of to separate you from how you normally interact with reality. Um, and in doing a lot of that, I I've always kind of had this, I guess, this imagination that kind of bends to be like, what would it be like to be a different kind of organism? Like being able to see an infrared, or being able to see the world through compound eyes, or even what it's like being human and just being blind or being deaf, or having some altered aspect of the way you normally interact with things. And I think it really puts a lot of things into perspective because it makes you realize just how finite the body is. Like for all of its miracles, there are a lot of aspects of it that remain uh, untapped into, and we're always kind of bound by what we are. But in very, very small glimpses, like you can just kind of transcend that a little bit. And I always thought it was a very interesting subject.
Yeah, and I think it like brings up like something we've touched upon like tangentially, which is I think one of the biggest trademarks of like great art, which is something that allows you to expand your perspective and get a glimpse of what it would be seeing at things or the world or a person through a different lens. And certainly that's, like in part of like the exercises that acting and role playing kind of give you the ability to touch and explore the world through a different perspective. And um and I think that's like something that is very important to that exercise, right? Like because in contrast to what we call kind of like the rational mind, which is kind of like about having these kind
Yeah,
of
one hundred
fixed
percent. Oh,
conceptions of things. Yeah.
oh yeah, 100%. Because yeah, it really does put things in perspective, like we were saying before, because um, it kind of gets you to almost like I know this might sound like a bit much, but it also kind of gets you to like shed that a bit of that myth of anthropocentrism, where it's like everyone kind of thinks about the human conscious experience, um, where to the point where they actually kind of ignore uh, different ways that you can sense things and different body plans and how they operate, right? Like I would say that, like to some degree, like pretty much every single organism is conscious in its own right. It's all kind of like a spectrum, right? As they, as we try and get closer to narrowing down the exact definition of consciousness, it kind of forces us to uh, recontextualize all of the things that we learned about like animal or plant anatomy, and to kind of think about like how exactly they interact with things. Because, for example, like even going to something that's very different from humans, like trees, for example, they they're constantly communicating with one another. It's the reason why in forests, like generally, they are much more healthy, but it kind of they always kind of rely on one another. Like in some ways, they're actually like very social because they are so attached by like the mycological ecosystem that they're interconnected with, and they're always kind of exchanging nutrients with one another, which means that they have to trade information with one another. So they kind of have their own social lives to some degree, if that makes sense. Like there are even times where it's like you kind of see uh you might see like a stump, for example, and then you might see new growth coming out of that old stump. And it happens because like there's so many nutrients that are just congregating at that point because they had sensed that one of their own had fallen, right? It's them uh, trying to support their fellow life form and trying to like divert the nutrients to them, and then it ends up just feeding this new tree. And I always thought that that was pretty fascinating because it's like, to what degree are they conscious of it, and to what degree are we conscious of our actions? Could it really just be us already operating on impulse? Could it just be that our body plan has just tied us into a certain way of thinking, and that maybe possibly in other life forms there are like certain concepts that haven't really been tapped into yet?
Yes, and I think like one of the interesting aspects of this is also like the kind of contradictory nature of these sort of meditations or contemplations, right? Where it's like at the end, what you also realize is that like you don't understand, like we don't understand like the human body as well as we think we do, right? Like through the capacity to extend our our awareness and our perspectives, there's always like an expansion that reveals as limited the previous one, right? Like so it's always so even in these like exercises of like trying to um understand things that are foreign to us, we end up discovering parts that of ourselves that were foreign to us, right? Which is I think the valuable aspect of this like this kind of um permeable membrane between what is human and what is not, and how it evolves throughout our development.
Yeah, 100%. I always thought that that was a really interesting thing because, like, you can even get small glimpses of that, not even through meditation, but you can get it through, um, like, let's say, for example, you have a fever. Like, I remember the way things would come to me, it would just be so different in throes of that illness, right? It's really weird because it's almost like there's certain smells that are only possible when you have influenza, just as one example. Um, and there are aspects to it too. For example, in dreams. Now, dreams are very strange and interesting because um, it's like your mind is kind of forcing you on this tour, and its imaginings are kind of interpreted as real for the most part, and you don't really know what to make of it. It's your own mind playing against you. It's like what you thought gave you autonomy is just kind of gone. And in that, like there are certain things that I would say like you can only describe it as the dream itself. Like words can't quite access it if that makes sense. Like for example, um, how would I put this? Like the exact qualia of encountering the dream opens up kind of new ways of seeing things. And I don't know if anyone else has had this, but this is one example. Only in a dream had I tasted something that was so terrible. I just woke up and I dreamed of eating something so bitter that it was like it was a brand new taste almost. And I always thought that that was so fascinating how it's like the brain can just conjure up completely brand new qualia just out of what it's integrated and just all of that inputs that it took in just being rearranged and scrambled to create something new.
Yeah, like like yeah, dreams are fascinating in that sense where like the usual like categories we have for sort of experiences seem really naive the more you kind of take a dream seriously, right? Like it's like kind of like the distinction between like real and illusion when dreams can actually provide way richer forms of experiences that in a way are way more needed or powerful than what you could experience at least in normal waking state, right? So like dreams are definitely connected in that sense to art very powerfully in terms of the sort of more profound and dense communication of symbols and ideas, and that can allow to kind of break the limitations that the waking state provides.
Yeah, 100%. Which is the reason why, like, I always just I find it so interesting whenever they happen. It's always something to take note of. I'd say that also to go back to the subject of um, and making the mind more flexible and just imagining different states of being. So you can even get that just trying your best to remember what it was like to be a child, for example. Like a lot of it was like um, you didn't necessarily react to things in the way that that you believe you were conscious of, or like I would say that it was more of an impulsive state. Like for example, like it's like, why would you like go around goose stepping effortless? Why do you go around like making that weird sound with your mouth? Like you're just doing it because you're doing it. Right? And I think to some degree, a lot of people kind of forget that state of being where you're just kind of going with the flow and just doing things, even if it kind of annoys the adults around you. But also, there's the art aspect of it too, where it's like, you know, as children, we were much more vulnerable physically because uh, like it was so much easier to become ill. And like there was even a point as a child where like I had appendicitis and I almost died. So a lot of that kind of ended up being almost um, this strange state where like I was in so much pain or like that it was so many drugs that's just kind of like a blot in my memory almost. But at the same time too, it's like as a child, I remember like, man, the dreams were so much more vivid. And like when those nightmares happen, like you would just come to it and you would almost believe it's happening even as you wake up. Like that state of like being awake, but the dream state is still kind of lingering, if that makes sense. And like your ears are almost ringing like tinnitus like. And just thinking about how different that was, it's actually quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like if there was like a drug that allowed you just to access the state of mind that you had as a child, like it would be like probably way crazier than any sort of mushroom or LSD or anything else. It's just part of like the kind of false beliefs we have about the past, where we think that like things in the past are understandable because we already experienced them, um, but like really we don't have like any sort of um, capacity to really access those states, because that's kind of like the I guess a one of the problems of memory in terms of like voluntarily bringing up information. Like this is not necessarily information, but a state of being, right? Like which is kind of also like the problem with remembering stuff that happened to you in a psychedelic state, right? Because it's like what's relevant is not necessarily what you're seeing, but like from where or what state you are perceiving it, and like the child's perspective is really um, well, you know, like foreign in that sense to us. Okay, well, maybe to end it there in like a what's been like a very interesting conversation. Do you wanna do like a final plugin or talking to people about your work or promoting anything you got going right now?
Yeah, I guess to take it from there. Yeah, I would say mostly my aims with what I'm trying to do is, like I said before, it's all about finding inspiration in pretty much anything. Whether that be, you know, like uh, books being the most obvious one, because obviously you have to read a lot of books to kind of hone the craft and explore many different genres. But that combined with like, you know, the visual aspect of movies or paintings or the kind of musical aspects, you can all kind of bring that together and integrate that into writing. Um, So I would say like being cross-disciplinary, it makes a lot of things come together. Because of that, I'm always trying to stay quite curious about a lot of different things. Um, and yeah, I would say overall, um, like I write in, I guess what you could say, pretty much most genres, but I would say that for the most part, it's kind of um, like literary fiction is a huge influence on me. Science fiction is a huge influence on me, and I kind of want to bring those two things back together again. I kind of want to figure out, okay, with these aspects of speculative fiction, like how can I bring things together in such a way that it feels like people are experiencing a new reality? Like how can you, like I said before, conduct the theater of the mind to open up new ideas to that way of thinking, right? And I think that fiction is a good vehicle for that because you can make your character literally anything. Like you can make your character a creature in the Sisyphus mechanism. You can make your creature, um, like let's say for example, Cats of No Dominion is another example. Like doing that kind of anthropomorphic fiction where it's like you can kind of bridge the line in between like, what is it like to be a cat versus a human, and we can kind of integrate like human aspects in that. So I would say I'm just trying to test the limits of that.
Yeah, and I think like you definitely do a great job. I remember that story about the Dominion of Cats, which was really good. Um and yeah, for everybody who wants to check out Eli's work, he's on Substack. It's ELLISWIENS. So I encourage you everybody to check it out. And well, it's been a really great pleasure. We touched upon a lot of interesting topics that I certainly enjoy, and so thank you.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me. I remember I think you were one of the first people who I read on Substack, and in some ways, like obviously I had read quite a bit of poetry beforehand, like for school and whatnot, and also just out of curiosity. Um, but like really seeing what the new guard is up to. Now that was interesting to me. I never, I mean, I kind of had some ideas of like text art combined with poems, but seeing the way you execute them, that really got my juice going.
Well, thank you, Liz. Like, I'm really glad you're a part of the community. I think you're somebody who brings in a lot, not only through your own art, but you also always leave very insightful and well thought comments for everybody. So thank you again, and like probably hopefully we'll have another conversation because we touched on a lot of topics that we could still go on for a lot of time.
Oh, I know.
So.
I gotta stop myself because when I get going, like, if there's someone else who is kind of resonating with the topics I'm into, like we could go on for like 5 hours, honestly. So,
Yeah, let's make it for another call so we can like um continue talking about all this stuff because yeah, that's one of also the other things, like I enjoy about your work is like this kind of um like affinities with a lot of topics that I also have obsessed with like for a while. So yeah, hopefully we can continue uh, talking about them soon.
yeah, totally. And also too, I just want to read more on the subjects and just gather as much knowledge as I can. So from here on out, it's only going to get more and more enriched. So that's, I guess, what I'm looking forward to. Uh, I guess just kind of honing my internal life, if that makes sense, and being able to communicate with more kinds of things with people. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Ellis, and thanks to all the people listening. And well, hope you have a great day.
all right, see you then.